The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Thank you. So lovely to see you all today. So I'd like to start with a story. A few years ago, when I was a novice monk, I was helping get things together for a special tea ceremony in the monastery. So accompanied by another monk, we went to look at a teapot that was being stored on a high shelf, to see if it was suitable. I saw that the teapot was up pretty high, but instead of getting out the step stool, I decided, that I was tall enough to reach up and bring it down myself. Well, as I was pulling it off the shelf, it slipped out of my fingers and shattered on the floor. And when this happened, I remember, the absolute shame and self-judgment that arose. Of course I knew, that I should have gotten the step stool. But really, a little bit of pride had gotten in the way, saying, you're pretty tall, you can reach that. You don't need the step stool. Even though there was a definite lesson that I learned in that moment, I think I found it pretty hard to let go of that mistake. It was something that I churned on for quite a while. So why is it that for some of us it is so difficult to make a mistake? Or if we've made a mistake, it can be so hard to let go of? Sometimes the judgment that arises, the blame and the shame even, can be overwhelming. So today I'd like to talk about how we can use our mistakes for the good to spur us on in training, and how we can use these precious opportunities to put the Buddhist teachings into practice. So I think there are really two types of mistakes that seem to pop up pretty frequently. The first is the type of mistake that happens often from inattention, from not taking care. Like, I've burned the cookies because I haven't set a timer, or maybe I set the oven too high to begin with. Then I think, there's the type of mistake that comes from unskillful action of body, speech, and mind. So perhaps I've burned the cookies, but out of frustration, I've publicly blamed the person who turned the oven on for me. Or maybe I've blamed myself, judged and belittled myself, for the cookies not coming out perfectly, as I had set my hopes upon. And I think this latter type of mistake really comes down to perceptual action. So when we see that we've made a mistake, whether of the former type or the latter, why is it that for some of us it can be so painful? As human beings, we're constantly making mistakes. Sometimes little moments of inattention results in just burning the cookies, but sometimes there can be significant consequences. Think falling asleep at the wheel for 2 seconds, or failing to read the dosing information on a bottle of pain meds. And on the other hand, if we've taken the precepts, many will know that almost as soon as we committed ourselves to taking the precepts, we found ourselves breaking them. So what do we do? In the Lokavipatti Sutra, the failings of the world, the Buddha taught, monks, these 8 worldly conditions spin after the world, and the world spins after these 8 worldly conditions. Which 8? Gain, loss, elation, sorrow, praise, blame, fame, and disgrace. These are the 8 worldly conditions that spin after the world, and the world spins after these 8 worldly conditions. So in this world, there is this constant push and pull between the things that we're drawn to, elation, gain, praise, and fame, and the things that usually don't make us look or feel very good, sorrow, loss, blame, disgrace. I think that the making of mistakes fits really well within the Buddhist teaching on the 8 worldly winds, because it encompasses all of the things that we tend to want to push away and the things that tend to push us around. And why do these winds hurt so much? Why is it so difficult for some when we've made a mistake and we are subject to blame and disgrace? And I think for anyone who's been on the seesaw of praise and blame, elation and sorrow, it can cause us, a lot of suffering. One moment we're being praised at work for doing a really great job at something. Next moment we're being blamed because we've made a mistake. Or if you think about, social media platforms like Instagram, we're constantly stuck in these cycles of praise and blame. So, you've got photo after photo on your feed that you're being asked to praise with a like, and then sometimes, someone might leave a hurtful comment if you posted a photo of your favorite cat. So you just don't know. And it's like this back and forth on this seesaw in our day-to-day life, running after the things that make us feel good, and then getting caught in the sorrows of blame and disgrace. But what if there was another way? If we can start to watch what our mind is doing when we're in the middle of the seesaw of praise and blame, what we might see is that these are conditions, just like our thoughts and emotions that arise in meditation, that are impermanent and subject to change. Anyone who's ever worked with children or had children, have you ever noticed how with children, one moment they'll want something and they'll scream to get it, and then after giving in to them, the next moment they change their minds and they want something completely different? And I think we see this with cats too. They'll scratch and yowl at the door to get outside, and then you open the door and sometimes they'll turn right around and come back in the house. And I think our minds are actually like this too. These are just exaggerated examples of what our own minds get up to. So if we only take refuge in the things that we think will make us happy, running towards the praise, the elation, the pleasure, what will happen to us when these conditions change? Because they inevitably will. If I rely on praise to make myself feel better about the job I'm doing, what will I do when I make mistakes? Where will my value as a human being be then? Can we instead see our mistakes as opportunities showing us what not to do? If we had known better, we would have done better. But when we can see our mistakes without the self getting in the way, we can take it to heart. We can really learn from it. Yes, I made that mistake, but the blame and the disgrace I might be experiencing are impermanent, subject to change. Of course, this doesn't mean that I won't have to pay the karmic consequences for my mistakes, because we do and we will. But seeing the drama that surrounds the mistake for what it is, just one of the 8 wins, helps us gain some perspective on the matter. Yes, it may be painful now. Yes, I may have hurt myself and others. So what can I learn from this, and how can I make amends for the harm I've created? Mistakes give us the opportunity to learn and to do better going forward. However, if we do not recognize the mistake as such, we will miss the opportunity to make the most of this precious gift. In the Digha Nikaya, the Buddha says, "It's a cause of growth in the Dhamma and Vinaya of the noble ones when, seeing a transgression as such, one makes amends in accordance with the Dhamma and exercises restraint in the future." In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha reinforces this point. He says, "These two are fools." Which two? The one who doesn't see her transgression as a transgression, and the one who doesn't rightfully pardon another who has confessed her transgression. These two are fools. The verse continues, "These two are wise." Which two? The one who sees her transgression as a transgression, and the one who rightfully pardons another who has confessed her transgression. These two are wise. I think that these teachings from the Pali Canon can be really helpful in light of our mistakes. The Buddha says here very plainly that we can grow spiritually when we can recognize our mistakes, make amends, and practice restraint in the future. Sometimes, of course, this is easier said than done. Many times I've had to make the same mistake over and over again before I've been able to see it as a mistake, to recognize it as one. Other times I've known it's a mistake, but somehow have continued back, on the same track over and over again until something shifts. For me, it wasn't until I understood that I was creating a lot of suffering for myself and for others that I began to look more closely at some of the mistakes I was making. So really, these mistakes, I think of them really as compassion, showing me what not to do. Of course, in response to our mistakes from the past, sometimes we can mistakenly try to solve our problem the problem of our suffering by coming at our mistakes from the angle of perfection. Next time, if I just do these things perfectly, quote unquote, I won't fall into disgrace or blame. There won't be anything to criticize. But of course, this is just another diluted view. If we are our own worst critic, inevitably we will always fall short of the mark. What we may not see at the time is that taking refuge in perfection is the same as running after praise and running away from disgrace. Again, we're allowing ourselves to be subject to conditions instead of finding peace amidst the conditions. So this brings me back to the question, why is it so hard for some of us when we've made a mistake? Why is it often so difficult to let go of? I think the short answer is because there's self getting in the way and because there's often judgment getting in the way. It feels good to be praised and not so good to be blamed. And we take the praise and the blame personally, when really our value as a person has nothing to do with our accomplishments and failures. But when we can begin to watch the mind, to be aware of what's going on in the midst of the conditions of our lives, we can start to see how we're running after some things and pushing others away. And when we notice ourselves doing this, just the very act of noticing that we're running after or pushing away is really helpful. This opens the door to sitting still with the push and the pull as they arise over and over again in our daily lives. When we make mistakes, it gives us this precious opportunity to step back from the fallacy of the self. Instead of seeing our mistakes as opportunities to blame and punish ourselves, we can see them instead as a needle that punctures the balloon of the self, that deflates these erroneous views and gives us the opportunity to take refuge in what is real, the three treasures of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. If we can follow the Buddhist teachings by recognizing our mistakes, making amends, and practicing restraint, these mistakes allow us to deepen our practice and grow spiritually. So for some of us, making a mistake and letting go of our mistakes can be a monumental task. Sometimes, though, when others have made a mistake, have wronged us, we can go our entire lives without letting go of these wrongs, even when they've apologized. The Buddha addresses this when he says, "These two are fools." Which two? The one who doesn't see her transgression as a transgression, and the one who doesn't rightfully pardon another who has confessed her transgression. These two are fools. Sometimes, no matter what a person has done to make amends, we continue to see them in the same light. People can even make great strides in their training, can change a lot, but no matter what, when we see the person coming, sometimes we can only see, them in their former guise. If someone has yelled at us and has apologized, we're naturally cautious around the person in the future. But if we only ever see the person in that way, that person, the way that person made us feel, again, we're missing out on an opportunity. So I've spoken at length about some of the types of mistakes that we make, how we can use these opportunities for the good to help us in our training, and some of the obstacles to reconciliation. I wanted to say a little bit more about the obstacle of judgment. I spoke about how the self can easily get in the way when we make mistakes, but judgment seems to come very quickly on its heels. The fact that judgment arises when we make mistakes isn't a problem as such. If we can observe the judgment as it arises and simply allow it to be there, it will eventually pass, just like the arising of thoughts in meditation. As the judgment arises, though, if we feed it, if we give it more energy, it suddenly becomes real, quote unquote, to us. So it isn't a problem that the judgment arises, it's what we do with it that makes the difference. If we're having difficulty letting go of the judgment, then just working on seeing it as it arises is a good first step. Just simply working on seeing the judgment as it arises opens the door for compassion to come in, to be able to hold all these judgments a little more lightly. Most people wouldn't welcome the censure that comes with making mistakes, both from others and from themselves. But having made a mistake, can we take the opportunity to apply the Buddhist formula for reconciliation? So to begin, just seeing, recognizing that we've made a mistake is the first step, and a big one at that. Next, take the opportunity to see how we can make amends. In his article, Reconciliation, Right and Wrong, the Venerable Thanissaro Bhikkhu, he makes a really helpful point about the reconciliation process as laid out in the Vinaya. He says, if a dispute has broken the Sangha into factions that have both behaved in unseemly ways, then when the factions seek reconciliation, they are advised first to clear the air in a procedure called covering over with grass. Both sides make a blanket confession of wrongdoing and a promise not to dig up each other's minor offenses. This frees them to focus on the major wrongdoings, if any, that caused or exacerbated the dispute. And what I really like about this is this idea of covering over with grass, just a blanket confession of wrongdoing, to kind of get the ball rolling. When we try to make amends, we can't expect that the other side will apologize if they wronged us, or if they've wronged us. But sometimes just saying that we're sorry that the incident happened, to begin with, if we can't muster anything else, can ease the way to full reconciliation. So continuing on, the Buddha's third step in the reconciliation process is to practice restraint in the future. If we can take the mistake that we've made and use it for the good to help us practice restraint in the future, easier said than done sometimes, this is true wisdom. Reverend Master Ju is often quoted as saying that she couldn't teach anyone who wasn't willing to make mistakes. And over the years, I've found this teaching tremendously helpful. As human beings, we'll inevitably make mistakes over the course of our lives. But it's what we do with these mistakes that makes the big difference. If we can recognize the self when it tries to get in the way, do our best to let go of the judgment as it arises, and practice the Buddha's 3 steps for reconciliation, then we might just find that the mistakes that we make in our practice can be the very teachings that we need to help us on our way. Thank you very much.